I checked my bank account 3 times before buying a $12 lunch. Not because I couldn't afford it. I could, but I stood there, phone in hand, doing the math in my head. Subtract rent, subtract utilities, subtract that thing I forgot I subscribed to. And by the time I looked up, the person behind me was sighing. That wasn't caution. That was fear wearing a spreadsheet. Here's the thing nobody tells you about financial anxiety. It doesn't make you smarter with money. It makes you worse. Everyone assumes that if you worry about money enough, you'll eventually figure it out. That the stress is the motivation. That the panic is productive. It's not. In fact, the more anxious you are about your finances, the more likely you are to make the exact decisions that keep you stuck. Avoid investing. Hoard cash that loses value. Ignore problems until they become crises, and spend impulsively just to feel relief for 5 minutes. Anxiety isn't a financial strategy, and treating it like one might be the most expensive mistake you're making. A few years ago, I had a friend. Let's call her Tara. Tara had a good job, decent salary, no major debt. By every objective measure, she was fine. But Tara couldn't sleep on the first of every month. That's when her rent cleared. Even though she'd had the money sitting in her account for weeks, something about watching that number drop would send her into a spiral that lasted days. She stopped going out. She stopped contributing to her company's 401k because the idea of money leaving her account, even for future her, felt like a threat. She turned down a promotion because it came with a trial period, and the uncertainty of that felt unbearable. And here's what nobody said to Tara. Not her friends, not her bank, not the 10 budgeting tips articles she'd bookmarked and never finished. You don't have a money problem. You have an anxiety problem that's disguised as a money problem. And those two things require completely different solutions. Here's the anchor of everything we're going to talk about today. Financial anxiety is not a response to your bank balance. It's a response to uncertainty. And your brain, trying to protect you from that uncertainty, will push you toward decisions that feel safe, but are actually quietly destroying your financial future. Let me say that again differently. Your anxiety is not lying to you. It genuinely thinks it's helping. It's pulling you away from risk. It's making you careful. It's trying to protect you the same way it would protect you from a lion. The problem is, there is no lion. There's a brokerage account. There's a 401k contribution. There's a slightly higher rent apartment that would cut your commute in half. And your brain is treating all of those the same way it treats the lion. That's the trap. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. When you experience anxiety, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for long-term planning, rational decisions, and weighing consequences, essentially goes offline. What takes over is your amygdala, the threat detector, the part that evolved to keep you alive on a savanna, not to manage a diversified investment portfolio. And the amygdala operates on one principle: eliminate the threat right now, which is why financial anxiety almost always produces short-term thinking. Not because you're irrational, but because the anxious brain physiologically cannot access long-term reasoning the same way a calm brain can. Studies have shown that people in states of financial stress perform measurably worse on cognitive tasks, not because they're less intelligent, but because anxiety consumes working memory. You're already running at reduced capacity before you even open the budgeting app. So when someone tells you to just make a financial plan, they're telling someone standing in a burning building to redecorate. The emotional environment has to change before the strategy can work. There's a concept in behavioral economics sometimes called the bandwidth tax. Here's a simple version of it. Researchers gave 2 groups of people the same cognitive puzzle. Before the puzzle, they told one group, imagine your car needs a $150 repair. How would you handle that? The other group was told, imagine your car needs a $1,500 repair. How would you handle that? The group thinking about the larger, more stressful expense performed significantly worse on the puzzle, not because they were less capable, but because financial worry had already consumed part of their mental bandwidth. Now think about what that means in real life. If you're chronically anxious about money, you are essentially running your financial decision-making on a laptop with 17 browser tabs open. You might get there, but you're slower, more error-prone, and more likely to just close the tab and walk away. That's not laziness. That's neuroscience. I once spoke to a man at a financial literacy workshop. He was 54. He'd been earning well for over 20 years. When the facilitator asked who had started investing before age 40, he didn't raise his hand. Afterward, I asked him why. He said, "Every time I thought about putting money into the market, I'd read one article about a crash, and that would be it. I'd tell myself, next year, when things are more stable." Next year. For 20 years. He wasn't uninformed. He understood compound interest. He knew the math. But every time he got close to taking action, anxiety found a reason to wait. At 54, he'd calculated what those 20 years of waiting had cost him. The number was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not because he'd made bad investments, because he'd made no investments, because waiting felt safe, and safe felt like the right move. And the right move compounded, just in the wrong direction. That's what financial anxiety really costs. Not one bad decision. 20 years of paralysis dressed up as caution. Here's a mistake I want to name specifically, because almost nobody talks about it. Anxious people often overspend. Not despite their anxiety, because of it. This sounds backwards. Aren't anxious people supposed to be too scared to spend? Some are, but a significant number do the opposite. They spend impulsively as a relief mechanism. The anxiety builds. The dread of looking at your finances becomes unbearable, and so you buy something. Not something expensive necessarily. A takeaway, a new book, a streaming subscription, something small enough to justify, large enough to scratch the itch. For about 45 minutes, you feel better. You got something. You have control over something. And then the guilt arrives, which feeds the anxiety, which builds until you need another release. Researchers call this retail therapy as emotional regulation. And for people with financial anxiety, it's incredibly common. And incredibly destructive. Because you're not spending because you're happy. You're spending because looking at your finances feels like facing a monster, and buying something small feels like running away from it. The problem is, running away from the monster is what makes it grow. Now here's where it gets interesting, and where most financial advice completely misses the point. Because everything I've described so far, the paralysis, the avoidance, the impulsive spending, all of it looks from the outside like a discipline problem. Your parents call it irresponsibility. Financial influencers call it a mindset issue. Banks call it poor planning. But what if the real problem isn't that you lack discipline? It's that you're trying to use discipline to solve an anxiety disorder. Stay with me, because the difference between those two things will completely change what you actually need to do next. Let me draw a line that I think will clarify everything. Caution looks like this. You research before you invest. You save a buffer before taking a financial risk. You ask questions before signing a contract. You move deliberately, but you move. Anxiety looks like this. You research endlessly without acting. You save a buffer, then decide the buffer isn't big enough. Then save more, then still don't act. You avoid the contract entirely and miss the opportunity. You make decisions based on how you feel right now, not what the data shows. Caution is a tool. Anxiety is a state. Caution says, "Let me be sure before I proceed." Anxiety says, "No matter how sure you are, something can still go wrong." And here's the crucial difference in outcome. The cautious person eventually takes action. The anxious person eventually takes cover. Both people might look the same from the outside. Both might describe themselves as careful. But 10 years from now, one of them has a 401k, a brokerage account, and real options. The other has a perfect record of never losing money, and no record of ever gaining any. So, what do you actually do? I'm going to give you 4 things, not 10, not a checklist, 4 concrete shifts. And I'll tell you why each one works, not just that it does. The first step is the simplest and the hardest. Stop making financial decisions while you're anxious. This isn't about ignoring your emotions. It's about recognizing that anxiety is information about your emotional state, not about the quality of the decision in front of you. When you feel the anxiety spike, before you check your account, before you close the investment app, before you decide not to take the meeting, pause. Set a rule. I will revisit this decision in 24 hours. Why it works. Anxiety is most intense in the moment. Most financial decisions are not emergencies. A 24-hour buffer doesn't cost you much, but it often costs the anxiety everything. Because when you return to the decision calm, the threat looks completely different. One of the reasons financial anxiety is so persistent is that the right actions feel enormous. Open a brokerage account, max out your Roth IRA, build a 6-month emergency fund. Each of those sentences contains about 100 micro decisions, and anxiety turns each one into a wall. So stop trying to leap over the wall. Find the door. Instead of, I need to start investing, the question becomes, what is the smallest possible version of this action? Log in to one platform, read one explainer article, move $5 into a high-yield savings account. Not because the amount matters, because completing the action proves to your anxious brain that the threat was not real. Why it works. Anxiety is maintained by avoidance. Every time you don't engage with your finances, your brain records, that was dangerous, stay away. Every time you engage, even minimally, and nothing terrible happens, you're rewriting that record. Small actions aren't weak, they're the specific antidote to avoidance-based anxiety. Anxiety wants to protect you. Instead of suppressing it, use it once, and then set a boundary. Here's what this looks like practically. Write down every financial fear you have. Every single one. Don't filter. What if I lose my job? What if the market crashes? What if inflation eats my savings? All of it, on paper. Then, for each fear, write, what is the actual probability of this? What would I do if it happened? This exercise does two things. It takes the anxiety from background noise to a contained conversation, and it forces your brain to confront that it already has more answers than it thinks. Why it works. Anxiety thrives in the vague. It loves the shapeless dread of something might go wrong. The moment you make it specific, you can evaluate it. And most financial fears, when evaluated specifically, are either much smaller than feared, or already have a clear response available. For chronic financial anxiety, one of the most powerful tools available requires almost no willpower. Automation. Set up automatic transfers to your savings account. Automate your 401k contributions. Put your bills on autopay. Not because you're lazy, because you're removing the moment of decision, the moment where anxiety can intervene. Every time a financial action requires a manual choice, anxiety gets a vote. Automation removes the vote. The money moves before you have a chance to feel scared. Why it works. Willpower is a finite resource, and anxiety depletes it faster than almost anything else. Removing the decision removes the anxiety trigger. Over time, your net worth grows not because you got braver, but because you engineered a system that works without needing you to be brave every single month. I want to leave you with something that's less of a tip and more of a reframe. Most of us were taught to think about financial success as a willpower problem. Save more, spend less, be disciplined, hustle harder. And when we fail to do those things, we conclude something is wrong with us. We're bad with money. We're not built for this. We're not like those people who have their finances sorted. But what I hope you're leaving this video understanding is, you were never fighting a discipline battle. You were fighting an anxiety battle. And those two wars require completely different weapons. Discipline is what you apply when the path is clear and you're just resistant to walking it. Anxiety is what happens when the path looks like a threat, and your brain would rather stand still than risk walking into danger that might not even be there. The people who seem naturally good with money aren't more disciplined than you. Many of them simply have a different relationship with uncertainty. They're not braver. Their threat detector is just calibrated differently. And here's the genuinely hopeful part. That calibration can change. Not overnight, not by reading one more article or watching one more video, but through small actions, repeated, that teach your brain, over and over, that the lion is not real. The brokerage account didn't eat anyone. The 401k contribution didn't hurt you. Looking at your bank balance, even when it's uncomfortable, did not cause the disaster your anxiety promised it would. Every time you do the thing anyway, you're not just making a financial decision, you're making a different kind of future. And that future? It was always yours to build. Anxiety just made you forget that for a while.